as you know, she is the VP of sales for Signzy. She leads our APAC region, and I think one of the best things about this conversation is, and I think she's one of the best person to ask you these questions that's going to come your way. One of the reasons being, I think she's been in the industry for more than 20 years, and she's led the industry and worked with BFSI sector over that period, right? And she knows whenever she asks a question, whatever she's talking about, when she talks about startups, when she talks about new technology, and when she talks about BFSI, she knows what she's talking about. And the type of questions that should be asked from you, I think she's the right person to do that. I don't want to go deep into like what has she done all those years, because that's a really long conversation. I'll just jump into the short introduction for you too. I mean, SMEs, the reason why we reached out to Udaan and specifically you was SMEs are fascinating in India, right? Every time you talk to people around the globe, they talk about this 50 million SMEs that India has. But the irony is not very many companies have actually tapped that potential, right? And some of them, or one of those has actually went into SME sector and actually made a name out of it, made a business out of it, is Udaan, right? And when we talk about Udaan and when we talk about SMEs, the one of the again this conversation comes into picture wherein hey, most of it is not exactly organized. It's unorganized sector, right? There's not enough data points to actually give them loans. There's not enough data points to actually help them move up. There's a lot of conversation around it, and the reason you are here is because you're a specialist in that. To be like Sheetal, you have worked in the BFSI sector for more than 10 years. You know what AML compliance is, you know what KYC compliance is, and you know what kind of risks that come with working in a sector like SME, right? And that's what Kunal is. Kunal, who leads, you know, KYC and compliance at Udaan. I think for this specific conversation on SMEs, he would be the best person to ask and best person to learn from. And at that, I would just want to move this conversation to you, Sheetal and Kunal. Please take over, and over to you guys.
Thanks, Vijay. That was very kind introduction. I must say that. I mean, it felt good to hear about your own self. But
Truth is always nice to hear, to be very frank.
thank you so much, Vijay. And thanks so much, Kunal, to be here with me talking
My
about this
pleasure.
topic, which is absolutely very on the top, tips of everyone's tongue these days, which everybody talks about SMEs. And but before we move that, I just wanted to know a little bit more about you. As you've been in the industry, of course, for a long time, for more than a decade, and you moved into the AML and risk profile very quickly. So how did you come into being there? How did you land up into risk profile? Because it's a very niche profile. People reach there after doing a number of different kind of roles and then reach. You reach there pretty quickly. So how did you and how's the journey been like?
So thanks Sheetal and Vijay for the introduction and this catch up. So it has been mostly the informed risk I have taken along the career with whatever visibility I had. So the journey started as a mechanical engineer, where I was looking after global sourcing, procurement, and contracts for a German wind turbine manufacturer. So got hang of trade finance from the customer side. And while I was trying to figure out after my MBA that where I want to go. So fortunately, from the banking side, got an exposure in Royal Bank of Scotland to lead their APAC uh, trade finance operations. So that's how the transition from a customer facing role to the banking industry. And while RBS was closing down almost 23 countries in APAC, so that was for any bank, any financial institution, when you close down the business, you are mostly prone to frauds, money launderings, where a lot of jobs are at stakes, and especially in other countries. So the pink slips come quite often fast. So that was the time when I kind of got an exposure of trade-based money laundering project. I first time in my 6 years of career, I found something interesting which I was enjoying doing. So that was kind of a narrow lens and the investigation perspective. You came to know the new world. So there I got myself certified as camps professional, and then I must say that I've been fortunate to got the choices I have made in terms of Paytm getting the banking license, and I got an opportunity to build the complete vertical bottoms up for the KYC enable compliance. And I have been just 6 years in my career. I was senior manager in and RBS. And for somebody of my experience was working in a global bank with multiple layers of global compliance, and you certainly get an opportunity to build the complete department in Indian framework,
Yeah.
new compliance and new requirements. So I just got onto that rocket ship, and then I figured out. I've been fortunate with my colleagues in the non-banking background, mostly into problem solving in startups. So have learned things on course, and then I came to Udaan, and now here I am managing fraud prevention for them.
Very interesting. So, what struck me about your profile, and when I was looking at it, Kunal, that you have actually uh, been on the wave twice, and on the uppicking wave. One was of the anti-money laundering, which the act came into being in 2002, and you just caught on to that. And second
Correct.
was of the digital when you were at Paytm. So both and you combined both of them beautifully. You just combined, so Paytm and in the digitization era that actually started to happen in the last 4 or 5 years, that and payments was of course one of these sectors that started. So how was your journey from, how did you see the digitization happen when you were at Paytm, and then you started to combine both? And then we will move to the topic of the day, because these were two something very interesting, striking things that came that I looked at when I saw your profile.
Yeah. So as I said, I've been lucky in getting the choices which I made. I've personally been advocate of organization I have worked for. So before joining Paytm, I can very well say that I was in the early adoption journey from customer side. I've been using Paytm, and I was quite uh, amazed to see the value proposition in terms of easiness of transaction. They pioneered the QR code business, and they made payments easy. They actually, before NPCI, I would say Paytm democratized the payments in India, and then everybody came on along.
Hmm.
So, and I've seen closely the problems, the challenges, the growth phase. I just joined post demonetization after 6 months, so I heard those stories, and then means I coming from a 200-year-old bank like RBS, so I never thought that things can move at such a rapid pace. So it was just that means with the colleagues, the vendors, with people I worked on, I learned on the go. I remember when I the early buildup of frameworks, then being designated as principal officer here and working with FIU directly, interacting with regulators. You don't get these opportunities in the larger organization, and at least my experience level. So I got to learn things firsthand, and at the same time, I tried to capture the essence of the intent of the startups who are trying to solve the problem, and the intent of regulators in terms of AML and KYC compliance. Because if you don't get it right, the cost of compliance for even a global bank like Citibank, in some of the aspects, they don't know that the cost of transaction is overshooting the cost of compliance or not. So it gets as tricky as you deep dive and you build your frameworks and you try to be operationally lesser heavy. And since there was only one mode of monetization, MDR, which again RBI has abolished, so it makes things pretty much trickier for any payment company or any fintech organization to invest. And I would say that here, I came to know about Signzy 1.5 years back when I joined Udaan. Then I realized that there could be a solutioning from compliance perspective as well. So previously we knew technology in terms of platforms for transaction monitoring, screening, but AI ML based solution of doing a single touch point API based integration and verifying your customers for most of the digitized repository which you have. So means I think everybody just rode the wave in terms of startups, vendors, startups on digitization field, regulators, and everybody was trying to solve on the go. And there came UPI, the major enabler for everybody.
No, absolutely, you're right. You're right. For individuals, yes, we've all seen the change. We are the change today. We are known more by our mobile numbers than our names now.
Correct.
So we don't carry wallets. Actually have stopped to carry even the credit cards anymore. So it's all about mobile. But do you think SME space is still lagging in this journey, and they are still feeling those challenges, or how do you see that emerging for that particular industry? We'll come to the stats a bit later, but maybe do you see they are still facing those challenges, or how is your experience there?
I think uh, I relate SMEs to my parents. Okay, so the kind of technology adoption and the trust build up. So still, our parents are a bit apprehensive of using apps and making online payments. They still believe that it's better to deposit a check or send somebody to pay that bill. So, but as I said, democratization of payments has been the major enabler with UPI coming into picture. That trust gap was, I would say, bridged, and then came players like Google who came into picture, and they kind of added to that layer as well. So you would have never imagined that you are going at a coconut shop and you only mode of payment you find is a QR code hanging around.
Yeah.
So each and everything in terms of total ecosystem being flourishing in terms of customers, your SMEs, in terms of fintech players, in terms of NPCI, at the same time RBI in terms of regulation. If the whole ecosystem comes into play for solving the real life customer problems, so then I think everything, then that adoption is bit easier for people who are new to them. That's the same which is happening with SME. Let's say if you take example of a particular use case, if you want to go and onboard some kirana shop on any platform, whether it's fintech, whether it's B2B e-commerce, or whether it is any logistics app also. So you go to them, you tell them that the goodness is, but they have their own network of established channels where they get the trade credit also, they get full-time service after a certain scale. So to communicate the goodness till the time they have not seen that, there is always an inertia and apprehension associated with that. And in terms of tax compliance and business documents, it's a bit trickier on that side, because it's not that SMEs are not willing to come on board and do compliances. It's more that the things are so complicated for them to come into that ecosystem, and they are a bit apprehensive in sharing those due diligence documents. So here comes the trust factor. Let's say with organization like OCE and Samunati coming into picture, and I would like to mention Nandan Nilkani, like he has solved UPI aspect. If he is able to solve this perspective, and then the way UPI has been accepted on the both sides in terms of SME and customers, we might be heading into the right direction. You just tell your mobile number and we fetch your KYC documents, and it's just a consent underlying which is obtained. And that unique identifier can be used across the ecosystem. So once this is done, it's solved. The most of the time we invest in convincing customers, onboarding them, and then bringing them to the credit cycle and getting those documents, doing their due diligence. I don't see a lack of intent on the both the sides in terms of financial institution, fintech players, and in terms of customers also. But the major barrier of that trust has to be bridged, like it has been bridged in UPI.
That's true. I know, I totally agree with you. This digital trust factor, that's how technology has come into play, and technology players like Signzy are trying to solve those problems of trust itself, the digital trust itself.
Correct.
How can we solve that? Yeah, but yeah, interesting thing, which I wanted to, when you were talking about this payments industry, uh, how few years ago I was just thinking that, we used to talk about banking world as only the asset side and the liability side of the books, right?
Correct.
And how suddenly one payment sector which came into being, which became a third pillar of the entire credit industry itself. So that is one piece which is, you know, I do see that yes, SMEs have grown a lot with respect to the payment industry. That became a good revenue source for, not just for the banks, for the entire financial institution. The entire industry started to grow quite a bit with respect to how the SMEs grew. As you rightly pointed out, even a kirana store has a QR code now, and everybody is talking about mobiles now. But do you still see the credit being given to them as a challenge to the SME? Do you see that, with the new skip, with COVID impact, and they having issues currently with the consumption going down in the industry today, and they having credit problems as well? Do you see that? uh, I can see that government is of course trying to help, but are the banks ready to take up those challenges and move along that credit wave as well?
So I would again like to draw the attention on the problem solving perspective. If you see intent of customer and intent of businessmen in terms of fintech players and banks, both are more than willing to take risks. And what I have seen in my experience, that the smaller players in the market on the merchant side are the most loyal ones, because for them it's a shop where they invest total in inventories of around 50,000. They make around 10,000 rupees. And even if you are able to churn that amount for them, enable them with credit, facilitate with door delivery, provide them proper service, and let's say their net income of disposable income increases by 20%, it comes to 12,000. That 2,000 is a major enabler in terms of his lifestyle, his quality of life. So I've never seen those people defaulting in terms of credit, but the major gap is the interface. You don't know how to segregate good players from the bad players. And these are the people you will never have credit history. So the conservative mechanism is not going to work. It's more about the organic trust you're able to build through digital channels. And at the same time, you need a mechanism to weed out the fraudsters and people who abuse the platform and make nuisance for everybody. So if that has been solved, let's say uh, we all know that the credit bureau have their products like hunters and other products where there is a consortium of bank which shares intelligence, and you come to know when you scrub the data and you come to know that these are the bad players. But let's say on the e-commerce websites, on the among the fintech players, there are a lot of people, everybody is sitting on at least 2 to 3% of the NPA, and some hit are related to fraud and abuse. If there is a complete lack of that ecosystem coming together and sharing that intelligence, because these people who abuse the platform abuse across ecosystem whenever a new internet player comes into picture. If you have that data, if you have that consortium of data, then and you scrub that, then a whole ecosystem can benefit from that. I still see that to be solved because uh, there are some issues around data security and trust among the ecosystem. So maybe in future, platforms like DLAI and IAMAI can play some role and bring major players on board, at least e-commerce and fintech players on board. So this can yield a lot of goodness, and that this will be a major enabler in terms of that bridging that trust. Not to mention a digital KYC and video KYC. I would say this has been a game changer.
Yeah.
So industry has been trying from quite some time, but it it was completely disruptive, I would say. And the way the whole industry has reacted to COVID, it has been because of video KYC in terms of due diligence. So
I think
this progresses. There are some teething issues.
Kunal, do you have network issue by any chance? Or
Am I audible?
now you are? Yes, now you are. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, as I agree with you. You made a couple of points. I would pick some of them here, which is one is about a bureau model for the SME industry, especially e-commerce. So that is something where number of merchants are there. So that's a very interesting concept you talked about, which can actually, yes, there is bureau works beautifully for the individuals, but for SMEs, which actually are not going to the regulated sector, or who are actually trying to, is there anything that can be built on their repayment histories? Is there something that can be worked? So do you think this the new age technology players that are coming in, do you think any of those players, any new technologies that are coming into play apart from the video KYC, things that will, any new interesting players that are coming in which will solve these problems for the SME space?
I'm very positive about the problem statement as such, but solving that will need the complete problem statement to be covered in breadth and depth also.
Hmm.
So let's say when we see complete QR code payment ecosystem, while Paytm has pioneered that, but if you see a player like Paytm, which has got support from the ecosystem, they have been able to do that because that requires investment of thousands of crores.
Yeah.
So these are the problems. So you might not be able to solve and monetize for becoming profitable in, let's say, for next 5 years, 7 years, or 10 years. So it needs very strong support system in terms of governments, regulators, and institutional investors, and conviction on the thought process itself. So the whole ecosystem needs to come together to be in sync and see the need of the problem statement to be solved as such. And if everybody is able to realize the collective goodness, like the likes of Flipkarts and Amazons, if they they work closely with the tech players in terms of payment space, maybe credit bureaus. So I don't see that can't be solved. But the collective goodness for the whole ecosystem, which can come where a banks like SBI sits on frauds of lakhs of crores. So the kind of impact that can have positive impact in terms of addressing that trust to the people who are not still onboarded on technology. So that can be totally disruptive.
Yeah, no, that is true. That is true. Couple of things, where we talk about, the new age kind of financing itself that is happening. I'll try to that also on board, which I think our listeners should hear about. So for many years, banks were only doing collateralized lending itself.
Correct.
It was, nobody had heard of cash flow based lending. So everyone used to just talk about, okay, I want a loan, but what is it that you will put on collateral, especially to the industry. And probably I actually feel that, industry contributes very low to our GDP today versus services, etc., because industrial wave never came into India, because the kind of credit that should have been available to the industry, and the credit which was probably required to grow that industry, of course, apart from bureaucracy and red tapeism, I'm not going to go into that. The kind of funding that was required for the industry was not there with Indian players. So, which is why this contribution is barely 30% to the GDP. And so, what happens is it was all about collateralized lending. And in the last 4 or 5 years, with the digitization, this cash flow based funding that has come in, which is brought in a sea change itself in the way the banking operates today, and especially the players who have started to come in with respect to just the who are doing invoice based funding for these players, have actually brought small players, women who are sitting at home, who are running their businesses. I can see businesses running on WhatsApp, them getting and all of them are actually, trying to increase the, I would say they are all trying to increase the business itself, and funding is becoming easier for them thanks to the technology, that this is happening. So maybe I should talk a little bit about stats which will put things into perspective for everybody, why India is here where India is, and where do they need to go. Is, as Vijay in the beginning of the webinar itself, he spoke about there are 6 crore entities in India. And if I say 6 crore entities, out of which about about 20 lakh of them are companies, and all of the rest are actually partnership, proprietorship concerns. And if you talk about, just those 20 lakh companies also, 20 lakh companies as well, out of them, barely about 20,000 of them have paid up capital more than 10 crores. So, just about 20,000 of those companies are actually, could become large in this universe, in India, only those are the ones who are actually driving the business today. And if we, and rest of them are too small. And rest of them is actually a very, 20 lakh companies out of 6 crore entities, that's a very, very minuscule number. Very minuscule. India could not produce that number of companies, that number of large entities, which could be done. Now, if we talk about a little bit from the funding side also, from the credit side also, if I talk about a little bit, if you look at India's banking industry is $2 trillion, whereas China banking industry is $40 trillion. So, and that's why the SME over there, the kind of businesses that they can produce, that they can manufacture, the kind of manufacturing they have come up with, it's because the kind of funding that was available to them. And vis-a-vis, which is what is not there. Even if you break this $2 trillion banking industry size, and you talk of just about the non-food credit part that we say, and non-food credit in the industry, if you look at MSME, 24% of the of the total industry credit goes to large, and SMEs get barely 5%. SMEs get barely 5% of the credit. So my
Right.
question, and actually it's not a question, Kunal, actually, so we have a long way to go. We really, really, I do see, with these stats coming in, if I put the stats out in front of us. So, we have a long way to go if we even see just China, or even if we want to be just not even $40 trillion, if we want to be just $10 trillion industry. So how do you see, what are the things that you think the industry needs to have, or the government support needs to have? What is the kind of ecosystem that India should be looking at? It's a little very open-ended question, and actually I would
Correct.
say it's a question also. You can. It's just a dream that we want to see for the entire space. And SME, how SMEs has to bring in, of course, SME has to bring in that, and actually I would say the micro has to move to small has to move to medium, and medium has to move to large category. So how can we make that happen, and your thoughts on that?
So I have a bit different perspective in terms of this problem stands solved or not. I see this problem is already solved, but that doesn't comes into ambit of what is accounted for. If you remember, if means if I see, I've been in Delhi for around 5 years. I saw especially the food market, the vegetable hawkers. Let's say anybody who comes from the nearby village, he has to earn a living. what he does is he goes to a local sahukar who lends the vegetable cart to him. He gives him 7,000 rupees in the morning, and by the end of the day, the guy who has taken the card and who has taken 7,000 rupees, he has to return uh, at least 8,500 and 9,000 rupees with the card. So if you see what this ecosystem is, somebody with a ground intelligence, somebody who knows the potential of this market, somebody who knows the intent and behavior of a potential customer. He doesn't knows the background, he doesn't knows the credit history of that particular customer. He doesn't know that the person will run away with money or not, but he knows the ground ecosystem so well that he can collect his money at least for 90-95% of the cases.
Hmm.
And if you
That's
see
the
the
point.
return on investment in one day is at least 30% on a day. So the way we look credit as an enabler in terms of metrics, I would say when you solve for SMEs or ground hawkers or people at the bottom of pyramid, they want to learn for a living, you need to keep your metrics aside. You need to keep your cost of capital, the return on investment, your NPA cost aside, and you need to think from the perspective that what value you are able to add for that particular day into the life of that particular customer. Somebody who comes, borrows 7,000, earns 10,000, gives back 8,500 and get back to home with 1,500. In a month, if he works for 20 days, he makes 30,000 rupees. He goes back to the nearby village every day and he is able to have a good life for him to send his children to his school and have good food on the plate. So this is the problem which we need to solve if we are talking about an economy like China or coming from 2 trillion to, let's say, 10 trillion or 40 trillion, because these problems are solved. Credit is one of the oldest business since time of civilization. It's just that it can't be solved completely digitally. The whole ecosystem has to come together in terms of ground intelligence. Lot of regional players will come and solve the collection problem in tougher markets for you. So let's say there could be a marketplace model, well, where it's just a random thought which has come to my mind. I'm just trying to demonstrate how it can be productized.
Yeah.
So there is a platform where you have your partner lenders in terms of bank. Somebody owns the marketplace. There are people who provide collections as a service. There are people like Signzy who provide the in terms of identity verification services. There are people in terms who own the customer service in totality. And let's say if a huge organization not able to solve this, but let's say like NPCI has prepared a real-time payment system like UPI stack, and if there is a stack of this marketplace where everybody can plug in and play and build the ecosystem, and a sanctity is maintained through regulators, we can't just imagine the impact it could have. It can bring all those people who are borrowing money from those sahukars every day, and they fear that they need to pay back. So what could be the impact we can imagine? So that's the problem I see which needs to be solved, and I'm pretty much confident that that will be solved because uh, 5 years back, 6 years back, before seeing the UPI adoption, if somebody would have told me, I would have told that this can't work. Even I couldn't imagine even. But after seeing the pace of adoption and the kind of funding which is coming into this ecosystem, and a lot of people who are trying to solve different problem statements and they are carving their own niche, I don't see this as a distant dream.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I agree with that. But of course, we are seeing new challenges with the digitization happening of fraud, and who would be the better person than you to talk about it? As we are moving into the digital era, the new kinds of frauds is something that we are hearing about. Yes, you talked about trust. Yes, you talked about, we need to build that. But as you plug one hole, there is a new fraud that comes into being, and a new thing, a new hack. So, and how do you see, as you rightly pointed out earlier, you spoke about, you see SME space moving at the pace at which your parents or my parents are actually adopting this. So it's because they can see the kind of frauds that are, they read more frauds about, they see the convenience, right? They see that, so how do you see that frauds industry being today, and where is that growing, or do you think that becomes a deterrent for this growth itself?
Yeah, so this is a question I try to find solution day in day out myself, and this is the question I think which needs to be solved in terms of industry coming together as a whole. Because if you solve by learning, I think it's too late. And the impact is so huge that smaller players can get wiped out totally, because there are dedicated call centers which are running to dupe customers. And by the time you institutionalize a control in your ecosystem, people are more smarter than you. And as bigger you grow, you have so many vulnerabilities and leakages. So that is the reason, the first point I pointed out, there has to be a collective ecosystem. Everybody needs to come together and sign up for this cause. And platforms like DLAI needs to play a very important part there, while getting acceptance of this problem statement from the largest stakeholders as such. Everybody can pay and use, like we use other API services for verification. So the collective goodness we can have is immense. Let's say if we are able to improve our NPA by 2%, while it costs point maybe 0.5%, then also means you first thing is you are creating a collective industry as such. And this could be a disruptive proposition for the global market as well, because I don't know if something like that exists. I mean, mostly the product exists only with the credit bureau, with people who have a credit history, but somebody who comes as a ghost and abuses you and goes back, nobody has those footprints.
Yeah, no, that is true. That is, that is one deterrent which is still, uh, that still keeps people away from digitization and from the growth. But of course, as the new age industries are coming up, and people are seeing that, the kind of exposures, the kind of markets they can get through digitization is completely different. And of course, with the new age technologies that are helping them, the kind of platforms they are getting, and as you rightly pointed out, the in kind of technologies that have helped is, video KYC into being, or simple APIs like image quality checks and face matches. The kind of, these are helping a lot the industry, but I think we still have a long way to cover and a long way to go from here to plug the loopholes and make our parents and this SME industry a little more comfortable with being. And I must say that, though demonetization started this journey of digitization, but COVID nailed it or stamped it, or actually, it said it just pushed it ahead. It just pushed it
Very
ahead.
true.
They said, okay, now, I had posted this on my LinkedIn some time ago. Somebody had asked me, okay, what is one thing that you learned? It was just about 1 month of lockdown. Somebody asked me, okay, so what's one thing you have learned in the last 1 month? Because it was all about, people were putting in, I learned this, and they were all talking about, in the last 1 month, this is what I did. I said, you know what? I've got good at using Zoom and Teams. I know how to use them. So, and that was a post that I posted that on my LinkedIn itself, that, yeah, I've started to get used to of this new age technology.
Correct.
And I actually see people who did not have bank accounts, people who did not have who did not have any kind of it was all primarily a cash economy. The person who was selling on the road was taking cash. Now is he just says Google Pay kar dijiye madam, Google Pay hai na mere paas phone hai, and this is completely a sea change that we have seen. And yeah, I do see that this digitization will help our industry a lot, and it will grow into a different ball game altogether if government also gives some kind of if some kind of bureaucracies and red tapeisms can be removed from building larger businesses and not thinking small. Because today everybody does think about only setting up a small kirana store itself. Nobody dreams about setting up a large industry, because nobody wants to actually sign up for 250 licenses. Nobody wants to do that. So can digitization somewhere actually reach there as well, that SMEs can slowly become large industries itself. So I think that's something which we still need to walk that path of growing, making this SME space into large entities. And I next time we I talk to somebody, maybe a couple of years down the line, I don't want to say that there are only 20,000 companies who have turnover more than 10 crores. I would like to say, yeah, these numbers have increased dramatically, and we are
Right.
also going to be one superpower, very very soon. Yeah, and it's good to see people coming out of fresh colleges and talking about being entrepreneurs today, and not thinking about only the services that we will do a job here and we will join services.
Correct.
They do want to be an entrepreneur, and of course, who better than becoming a technology entrepreneur? So yeah, thanks to the technology entrepreneurs, we are building a digital trust system itself, that
Correct.
on the basis of that, on top of this, that digitization of SMEs can happen. And yeah, it's a industry, it's a very interesting space to be in. So any thoughts on what do you think government can do to make things better for this industry?
I think uh, from regulatory interface perspective, I would say the stances of governments and regulatory bodies like RBI has changed, and I would say has changed for good, because with the Digital India initiatives and some startup funds getting launched, and RBI also coming with some uh, innovative proposition like creating sandbox for payments, closely with industry veterans, and trying to anticipate what else needs to be regularized or has to come under regulatory ambit. So I personally feel very fortunate to be part of this particular era where I see and sense a lot of positive across ecosystem. So while technology players like payment, Paytm created markets for payment. Now we see three, four multiple players there. Now we see NPI has been major enabler. In terms of e-commerce, the likes of Flipkart's, Amazon's, in B2B e-commerce, Reliance, Udaan. So if you see, the market development has been immense. And once competition comes, then the problems which are being solved in breadth get solved in depth also. So though those would be the I would say down the line 3 4 important challenges. Able to, especially from credit and identity verification perspective, if you are able to weed out the bad guys, then I don't think anybody who gets sees an organic goodness in terms of business and making their life easier would be more than willing to come and get onboarded. So
Hmm.
and there statements which will get defined, like some of the things we would have not imagine 8 months back or 9 months back and a year back before COVID. We have seen certain issues which have been enablers and blockers as well. So day in, day out, when we see newer problem statements and we solve them, then we come to realize that what could be the larger impact per se on the overall ecosystem. That's what I said. In terms of trust and safety, now technology companies are solving this individually. More or less, it has a natural learning curve, which has an inflection point, and it takes a lot of technology and data science resources to be channelized to solve that problem. Imagine the cost being incurred at each and every company level. If everybody comes together, then this is a service. We see everything coming onto SaaS platforms, and you pay per use for each and every service which you can't afford individually for a smaller organization also. So if we are able to solve this, mostly larger players come into play, then they do good not only for themselves, they do good for the complete ecosystem as such.
Yeah, that's true. And we are seeing this happening in other sectors any which ways. So
Yeah,
kind of consolidations are happening and the newer players are getting into those spaces and actually building on top of that. That's true.
right.
That is true. Do you see language being a problem anywhere in this ecosystem? The we have
Yes, yes. So share chat story, I am very proud of these people. Vernacular is going to be the next biggest problem statement because the kind of diversity we have in terms of mostly customer experience, if you don't have your mechanisms built up to address while
mm,
you're targeting SMEs and you don't have capability to deal with vernacular language intelligence, because see, whatever you build in in the early adoption cycle, customers will reach out to you wherever finances are involved. A small payment, they are not able to understand that that has reached your bank account, but you have not received SMS, or the SMS has been missed out in the clutter, and they have kind of panicked. Somebody whose average transaction value is 200 rupees and 500 rupees amount of transaction is not able to relocate, he will immediately reach out to customer support. If those channels are not sorted out, if somebody speaking Kannada is not being redirected to an agent within 2 minutes of waiting time to somebody, an agent who speaks Kannada, I don't think that trust can work. So, as I said, these are the problem statements which needs to be solved in depth, and that comes at a very huge cost. And for the platform like payments or uh, loans, where if you don't have a scale to monetize these transactions, uh, and by the time you have not built up trust, I think that's a vicious circle. You keep on rotating, you keep on funding those things, and uh, always investing in customer experience is a very big call. If I personally, if uh, I am able to call out 2 3 players where I am very happy with the customer experience I get, I can recall only 3 names: Amazon, Amex, and maybe Big Basket I use daily. So you see the amount they per agent they invest, and the cost of customer experience they incur, and the amount of empowerment and the safe ecosystem they have built to weed out the bad players. So this has taken them 20 25 years to master and pioneer customer experience. If you see what these players have mastered is mostly solving for trust,
true.
and then everything else was built
No, I
around.
yeah, I totally agree. Digitization has solved a lot of problems, but of course, with every problem, as we spoke about earlier, you solve one problem and you realize there are 10 more to solve as well. And trust was the basic thing that got solved, that people are, or I would say companies are still grappling with any new player
Correct.
that comes in. First he has to establish his own being, that yes, I am, you can swipe your card on my payment gateway and I'm not going to keep a track of your credit card numbers. Your numbers will not be sold somewhere on the dark web.
Correct. Yes.
So yes, those are the true, and especially when you come to tier 2, tier 3 cities, or people who are not so, who don't live in Bangalore, and who don't try these new apps every day, and who are not scared of using the technology. It's very hard to tell them that um, things are okay. You just
Yeah.
try this out. People are not out there to just fleece you and take your payment away from you. And if you talk to them in your own language and a message comes to them in their own language, they can read it themselves, and they don't have to be dependent on somebody else to read the message. I think yeah, we would reach there sooner than later, but that's a journey which we all need to still walk on. That's still some time away. Vijay is giving us some kind of hints that
Correct.
I can see that he's switching on his camera again and again, and saying that, okay guys, you are going on, and because
Yeah.
this is a topic which is very close to my heart, and actually I can there are a lot of things which can still be discussed, from growth to challenges to what has been and what are the new technologies. But yeah, Vipul, you
Correct.
have some thoughts on it.
I see that. I see that. I'm so sorry. So before we actually run out of time, I wanted to ask these questions that people have asked. Apart from the two, three that came in the chat, actually, people who registered with us sent us a bunch of questions. A lot of them actually got answered in your discussion. I mean, that rarely happens. I have to ask at the end of it. But there are some things, right? For example, this question came in. So Kunal spoke of trust, and Chitri also spoke of trust, right? And coincidence is this, right? So this question has come in, right? It says SMEs is basically a trust-based economy, right? And for a new player, this gaining this trust, the question actually is pretty straightforward. The question is, what do we do to actually gain that trust? What can be done? Is there a formula? Is there a rule that should be followed? Like, how do you gain that trust from? It's to both of you.
Kunal, you are closer to this topic. Maybe you should talk a little bit.
So I think it's a very wide question, and it totally depends on what problem you are solving. Like if I can take few examples, like if you want to solve for credit, if you want to solve for convenience of payments, maybe you want to solve for supply and demand side of whatever business somebody is in. So it totally depends on how you build that trust. For example, let's say when COVID struck and lockdown happened, any kirana store, if he is getting his unanimous supply throughout at a stipulated time frame, and he sees the demand getting up from the local customers, so if you're able to solve for that, there is an organic trust which is built up. So you solve one problem, you create trust, and you cross sell, and you capitalize on that. So that's how it is. You solve for payments, you make it convenient for them, make it easier for them, you give them credit when you have the transaction history, you underwrite them. So that's how it is. Totally depends on what kind of problem you're solving. Mostly, I see these two use cases. One is payments and credit. Second is the demand and supply of any item which that business is particularly selling. So these are two things.
Yeah, I mean, and that does make sense, right? They say choose a niche, become really good at it, and then you sell the world to them, right? So I've heard that before from some of the people that I follow. Again, a pretty wide question, right? The question is, this year a pretty big chunk of budget, 15,700 crores has been assigned to MSMEs, right? And when combined with this, with the latest technological changes that has happened in the market, maybe due to COVID, maybe due to other reasons. Where do you see SME landscape going in the next 10 or 20 years? Like, how would they grow? What would they become? Ideally, if like how Sheetal said, right? I believe we should grow into a large SME economy, and become a really compete with the likes of China. But where do you see us going, considering all the factors that are there right now?
See, budget in terms of being an enabler for MSME, I don't see much of goodness, and I am telling this in my personal capacity totally, because you extend moratorium, you extend repayment for certain players, and when you charge interest to them, you don't solve for the underlying impact which they have got. So, and these are very complicated problems which can't be solved as an incentive from government, because we know that our fiscal deficit is also skyrocketing around 9.15%, and whatever you subsidize, there's a cost associated to it, and you need to borrow for that if you are net fiscal deficit negative. So while the government have been trying to make certain interventions, but let's say an organization which has lent money, a customer who has received money, the problem which has happened is that business has got impacted and businesses are shutting down. Around 30% of smaller businesses have shut down or are on the verge of getting shut down. How does this get solved in terms of, let's say, we extend the moratorium? Someone who has lent that money has a certain cost of capital. When you bridge this gap, who is going to be at the bun of that particular hole? It's not like that always banks have the deeper pockets. They also leverage whatever the cash they have in the system. So there is no one right answer to that. But just talking about MSMEs, whatever the impact has been, it can't get reversed by interventions. It can only get reversed by demand. And by the time if they are able to cope up and stay in the game, I think then the reversal will happen through demand creation, and whatever the income they are able to generate, maybe some write-offs, and from and the whole ecosystem needs to come together, and that even the people who are lending should not suffer too much. People who have lost their business, they don't have anywhere to go through. So there will be some impact which will remain unsolved. But definitely, if demand picks up in the right time, we have seen that positivity around that the things are doing better than expected, and whole economy is seeing V-shaped recovery. So this could be there could be a positive impact. In short, the impact should be can be so good that we might leave behind the COVID.
Building on this,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree, because currently the problem is not money, that there is no liquidity problem in the with the banks, right?
Correct.
Banks are actually putting money, park their money there. So problem is not credit to the SMEs at this point in time, especially COVID. Problem is more dying of the requirement or the consumption requirement itself. Our whole economy is consumption led, right? So, and if people are not buying, if the economy is that consumption is not happening, is we have come to a vicious cycle at this point in time, and that needs to be broken. And which, thanks to as the budget was being announced, industry was cheering for it. And of course, some of the stands were very good, well said in that, where the government took the stand that they will not worry about the inflation at this point in time. They're okay to increase the fiscal deficit, but rather but grow the economy more through government spending at this point in time, rather than trying to address it through the private consumption. If they can do that, yes, that will. So people started to call me, oh wow, COVID is over. That, so that was probably a good sign people were waiting for. And that what is going to change this scenario, that I don't want to step out of my house and spend, right? So how do I change that? So if government spending actually picks up, so what happens is that the jobs will get created, and jobs get created, and people who have gone to their villages, and suddenly the work is there. Once the work is there, people start to earn money, and people start to earn money, and they go back to the SMEs to work, and they suddenly start to have dreams once again of, I want to start my own business itself. So so current problem is not about that SMEs don't have don't have, they don't have credit problem at this point in time. So the challenges are different, but I do see, as I say, it's a Indian economy is based quite a lot on sentiment. So yesterday was, as I said, budget came out, and yesterday I got 3 calls. People were saying, "Oh, why don't you start traveling now because COVID is over?" I said, "Oh, really? Where did it come in the newspaper? I haven't seen it." So where is the COVID is over? No, no. Now industry will start to pick up. Things are good now, and numbers have gone down. Government has given good budget. Now we can start to work from office. Okay, that's a good way of thinking about it. Yes, so hopefully this sentiment will help, and the government announcement of allocation will start to bear some fruits very soon.
Actually, you already the next question I was going to ask was, what can government do more than what they are doing right now? And you guys actually already answered it. So I mean, but I'll go ahead and ask. It's a pretty good question. So the question is like, could or should the government do more for MSP funding and overall growth? As in, when they, what can they do for the future? And could new lending methods reduce this economic gap that has been created in the business economy, right? Especially considering that consumptions of different age groups or different people are varied. So basically, in a way, you guys have actually already answered, but I'm going to push a little bit more and trying to figure out if there is anything that you think should be done. And I'm going to expand on this question from both government perspective, individual perspective, and private perspective, right? What do you think can be done more to help these small businesses at this point in time, right? So yeah.
Kunal, you want to take that first?
I seriously don't have any different answer, Vijay. So what I've told, and I don't see this as a credit problem. I just see that everybody needs to hang around for some time. Demand picks up and everything starts rolling. So I one thing which I look forward to is foreign institutional investment in, especially in terms of debt funding for the fintechs. So because the cost of capital for the newest fintechs in these times has gone so high that that can create a vicious circle. And coming from a startup ecosystem, so I feel for them, and that's the only thing which I feel that particularly for the ecosystem is not good.
I'll add a little bit to that, Kunal. Yes, at the ground root level, that is there, but um, the things that probably government, so these problems, so all these years why things could not happen. Yeah, right. So all these years why we still have, as I keep saying, industry which is not there at all, right? Barely large industry houses that we talk about. And this, it's very hard for micro companies to become small, and it's very hard for small companies to reach the mediums. It's because I keep saying that banks keep calling me for funding, for आप personal loan ले लीजिए, आप loan ले लीजिए, because they know that I don't need it. So bank credit is available for people who don't need it, and people who actually need it, they don't have it, they don't get it so easily. So companies who want to grow, it's not that the credit is the problem, it's not the liquidity is the problem, but the whole time duration for them. And when you talk just about the, as we spoke about earlier also, when you just talk about collateral funding all the time, so banks also have to step up towards that now they're talking about cash flow financing. Why cash flow financing is only talked about just at the fintech companies, and why not by the large banks itself? So that's something, the model of the financing needs to change. So that's something which banks need to talk of as well. And why they are not going to the smaller companies and making life simpler for them also to take credit. That's one point. And of course, when somebody wants to become bigger companies, uh, government needs to reduce the red tapeism somewhere. The kind of licenses which everybody requires is just so huge. Because it's a very open question, so I'm talking about things which are not maybe related to the technology also. But somebody told me, I was talking to uh, yeah, I was talking to someone and who runs his own company. He says, at least 12 inspectors come to my office from different departments every month, and we need to make sure that all the standards they have put, they come and check, and I have to be there myself to make sure that all those things are met. He says, where does my productivity goes at that point in time? So if you have to spend even 2 hours per inspector per month, so you can imagine where your time is going. So, and for any licensing, it takes a very, very long time. So those kind of things is something which government needs to make their things, the processes much easier for them to. A lot of things have started to happen. I won't say that things are not happening. A number of things are already happening, and they are in the pipeline, but there is a long way to go as well. If I want to start a company, I want to, my conversion of being a partnership or proprietorship to a company, as I want to grow, I want to be a limited company, right? I don't want to stay in a proprietorship and a partnership. So I want to become a company. But if the business is not working, I can't wind up. Opening a company is a one-day job, but closing a company is it can be a 1 year to a 10-year affair, because you cannot get your name struck off from MCA itself. Right, so
Correct.
those are real challenges that people face when we talk about SME growing from government perspective. Yes, technology is helping, technology will help, but there are a lot of regulatory things that need to be addressed as well for this industry to grow.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, agree to that. So over time, there is, as Kunal said, demand has to pick up, and as demand picks up, a lot of things in terms of policies, in terms of red tapeism, like Sheila said, has to change. Sheila has to change, right? And the thing, and how you said it, right? People who don't need it tend to get it, and people who do need it do not have a choice, right? So that's like pretty good, deep stuff, right? I mean, when you think about it, that's where changes can happen, and that's where this new technology and new startups that come in can make a difference, right? And eventually, even at this point, it might be that large companies or banks are not picking that up, but eventually they will have to. Just look at what happened in Europe, what happened in US, right? Eventually, when banks came in and they did really well. Now traditional banks had to start their own arms of neobanks. Like they had to do it. And hopefully, with what's happening right now, hopefully how we are growing and how what Udaan is doing and what Signzy is doing, maybe it would affect this entire cycle, and take us to a point where we can actually make a lot of difference to these small businesses around India. I'm so sorry. All these questions have pushed our timeline beyond what was expected. But having said that, this was a very, very interesting session. I personally learned a lot, and just wanted to thank you both. Thank you, Kunal. Thank you, Sheetal, for being here. We record this, and it'll be on YouTube. So apart from the people, that 30, 25, 30 people who came in, I think a lot more would learn a lot from this. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.